Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to First Baptist Church for our worship today. Had a few announcements, and most of those can be found on the back of your bulletin. So if you want to take a look at the back of your bulletin, we are going to postpone our mission trip meeting for a week. We are working on maybe finding a more local option for the mission trip, but we're still in talks about that. So we're going to postpone that mission trip meeting until next week at 5. Tonight, choir practice. And then this week, Monday through Wednesday, the Flint Hill Church, which is right up the road here, that we've had a relationship with for quite some time, is having a revival. Dr. Bruce Lax is preaching tomorrow night. I'm preaching Tuesday night. And Reverend Kay Boone is preaching on Wednesday night. So, as you know, Don and Angie both passed away very abruptly just a month or two ago. And so we were asked, the different ministers in here in town were asked if we might be willing to kind of uplift that church as they're going through some rough times, because Angie was also their piano player. So we'll be there and for this week, and just try to come if you're able to at least one night. That'd be great. But I know that they would really appreciate any attendance on that. This Wednesday also, before we go, I'll be taking the bus for anybody who wants to go on Wednesday night to the revival. But before that, at 6:30, we're going to have a special call business meeting to discuss the budget. We'll have the beginnings of our proposed budget for 2020. This is just the first steps as we're looking at the next year and seeing what we need to do. Thursday, our community meal, and then Saturday at 7 a.m. we have the food pantry. So please come on out at 7 a.m. for the food pantry. And then the youth, they are going to reschedule their Scarewinds trip to another time. Also later this month, we're going to have our Halloween. We're going to participate in Halloween in the park. So that'll be a big event for us. We'll need any and all volunteers just to come help pass out candy, but also to bring candy. So be aware of that as it's coming up quickly as always. So. Are there any other announcements I missed? Okay. Let's move into our congregational concerns and Thanksgivings. I had several to bring up. We've had a lot going on this past week. I spoke with Carolyn this morning. Cam Brown, he is still sedated. He is not responsible right now, but they have decided to go through this protocol where they're trying to get blood flow to his brain. So that takes usually about 48 hours, they said last night. So tomorrow at the earliest, we might know something. And once I do, I'll let everybody know. We'll be in prayer for Cam and Carolyn. It's a rough situation right now. Also, I saw yesterday Lois Laughlin, who's Rodney's mother. She is not doing well. She has leukemia. She's been battling that, but now she also has pneumonia. So be in prayer for her as she's struggling with that. Jean Smith told me this morning that her sister Hazel Green had successful surgery, that she's going to stay around at the hospital there in Concord. I said it right that time. And for a while. Then I got a text this morning from from Bob Morgan about Pat. She has had some heart palpitations this past week, and she's very weak. They put her on a heart monitor, so she's struggling a little bit with that. But I just wanted your prayers for that. Any word with me?
Tim's with him now. He spent the night with him. Joel's in a lot of pain, and they're just trying to keep him comfortable.
That's Tim's dad, Joel. He's just in a lot of pain, and they're trying to keep him comfortable. So be in prayer. Jennifer is having chemo, second round of chemo this week. Natalie's going down to stay with her. Any other information? No?
Just, thank you for your thoughts and prayers.
Keep praying for her. And George Lincombe is doing better, and he's getting a little better every day, so it's good. Yeah, so that makes Barbara a lot happier. So what other concerns and Thanksgivings might we miss? Yes,
we need to remember Gary and Connie Dunn. Gary's mother passed away yesterday. And so Gary and Julie, that's his sister. So just keep them in your prayers.
Who else? Yeah. Nancy.
I have a Thanksgiving and a prayer request. So thankful to have her back. And I'm thankful for those in our church who are willing to serve. The prayer request is related to that. I believe this is God's church, ultimately. And God has gifted us with enough resources to make things work, despite a lot of the challenges that we have faced. So I want to encourage you that if you can attend this business meeting that we're having this Wednesday, because while we see this as God's church and He has gifted us, we're expected to manage those resources. And so if you're not able to come to the business meeting, please be in prayer. It's not all about money, even though it sounds that way. It's not all about money, because part of what we're tasked to do is service. Some of us, like me, don't have a lot of money to spend. But if we can do something else that God calls us to do, then let's not wait till He nags us into submission.
That's okay. Thank you. Any others? Let's begin our worship with some music. Well, Lord our God, as we come into your house this day, we are thankful. We're thankful that we have the opportunity to share amongst ourselves those concerns, those burdens that weigh on our hearts and minds. Lord, you know each and every situation. You know what is needed. You know where we can be of comfort and support in the lives of those people who have been needed. Lord, give us the strength and the compassion to do so. Lord, as we come into your house, we come hoping for a word from you. Allow us to listen for it, to hear where we can do better for you. But also a word where if we have fallen, we can receive grace. And we thank you for this time. We thank you for Jesus the Christ. You gave us the example to follow here on earth and taught us to pray, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever. Amen. Would you join me as we read responsibly our call to worship printed in the bulletin? Hear, O people, the Lord our God, the Lord is one.
Which is the greatest commandment in God's law.
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind.
The second is,
Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and prophets hang on these two commandments. There is no commandment greater than these. Come, let us worship the Lord our God. Would you stand as we sing our choral call to worship? Sing Alleluia to the Lord. The words are in the bulletin.
The scripture lesson this morning comes from Deuteronomy chapter 5, verses 28 through 33, and chapter 6, verses 4 through 9. If only they had such a mind as this, to fear me, to keep all of my commandments always, so that it might go well with them, and with their children forever. Go say to them, return to your tents, but you, stand here by me, and I will tell you all the commandments, the statutes, and the ordinances that you shall teach them, so that they may do them in the land that I am giving them to possess. You must therefore be careful to do as the Lord your God has commanded you. You shall not turn to the right or to the left. You must follow exactly the path that the Lord your God has commanded you, so that you may live, and that you may go well with you, and that you may live long in the land that you are to possess. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is your God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. Keep these words that I am commanding you today in your heart. Recite them to your children and talk about them when you are at home, when you are away, when you lie down, and when you rise. Bind them as a sign on your hand. Fix them as an emblem on your forehead, and write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates.
Would you stand as we sing our hymn, Ancient Words, page 31 in your hymn books? Please stand as we sing.
Good morning. Do you have any rules in your house? Do you have rules to follow? If you have rules in your classroom, if you go to school, do you? Sometimes you think there are just too many rules. Just can't remember all of those rules. Yeah. Well, you know what? There are lots of rules. And today we want to talk about what's the most important rule. Now, there was a man named Moses. Do you know the story of Moses? And you know, Moses went up onto the mountain and he came back with the 10 commandments. The 10 commandments. Those were laws from God because the people at that time really needed some rules to order their lives. Now, the rules that Moses came back with are these. Number one, love God more than you love anything else. Number 2, don't make anything in your life more important than God. Number 3, always say God's name with love and respect. Number 4, honor the Lord by resting on the 7th day of the week. Number 5, love and respect your mom and dad. Number 6, never hurt anyone. Number 7, always be faithful to your husband or wife. Number 8, don't take anything that isn't yours. Number 9, always tell the truth. And number 10, be happy with what you have and don't wish that you had other people's things. Now, do you think those are good rules? Yeah, do you think they're important? Absolutely, they're important. They are very important. And you know, the people of Moses' time and after Moses, they came up with even more rules to go along with those, to help the people know how to live. But then, many years later, God sent his son into the world. And who was God's son? Jesus. He sent Jesus into the world. And Jesus taught us something very important. Now, Jewish people that came from the people of Moses' time forward, and they had a prayer called a Shema. And the Shema says, and we've done this before, you might can do it with me. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And Jewish people say that in the morning and at night, 2 times every day. And that's one of the first prayers that children are taught in the Jewish household. Well, when Jesus came, I'm sure Jesus said the Shema twice a day too, that you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might. But some people came to Jesus and they thought, we might trick Jesus. Let's ask him a really hard question. And they said, Jesus, we know all of these commandments, and we kept all of these commandments, but would you tell us what is the most important commandment? And this is what Jesus said. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. This is the first and greatest commandment. Then he added something, and he said, and a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. You shall love other people just like you love yourself. And he said, there are no other commandments greater than these. So, what is the greatest thing? Love. The greatest thing is love. And if we can love God and love other people, then that will take care of all of these other rules, other commandments. Yeah. The greatest thing is love. Now, I thought you might like to take something home so that you can remember that. So let me give you one of these for fun of you. Right. So you can remember the greatest commandment. Let's pray. Our Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for these children. And we pray, Father, that every day that we can help them to understand more and more what it means to love you and to love others as they love themselves. For in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Would you join me as you read responsibly our prayer of confession? Lord our God, we confess before you our lack of love.
We have not loved you as we should.
We have not loved others as we love ourselves.
Yet out of your eternal love for us, you sent your Son to show us how to love and to reunite us with you.
In his name we ask your forgiveness and pray that you will fill us with truly love and serve you, loving others as you have loved us.
Loving not just those who love us, but those who count us as enemies.
Through your reconciling love, forgive us and help us to forgive others. Write these laws of love upon our hearts. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Hear the good news. In the name of Jesus, you are forgiven.
In the name of Jesus, you are forgiven.
Let us pray. Lord our God, we thank you for this time to be in your house on this Lord's Day. We thank you for this opportunity to listen for you. Too often, Lord, we spend our time with you talking. We will tell you what is happening. We ask you for things, and rarely do we listen. In this week to come, help us listen for your guidance and your leading. Help us acknowledge that we need direction in how to and who to love. Lord, allow us to remember your commands to love you and to love others. Provide us those situations where we may love people with all our mind, our heart, our soul, and our strength. Forgive us when we don't do as you ask, and tell us when we need to simply stay silent and listen. Lord, be with us as we go through this next week to come, and allow us to be the hands and feet of Christ to all we encounter. For it is through Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen. Just as we sing our offertory in the church's one foundation, verses 1, 2, and 5, it's 246 in your notes. Please sing as we sing.
We ask these things in Jesus' name. Be still and know that I am God. I am exalted among the nations. I am exalted in the earth. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to keep still. For God alone, my soul waits in silence, for my hope is for him.
So many of you historians probably know a little bit about Thomas Jefferson and his Bible. For those that don't, late in life, Thomas Jefferson did something that most of us who grew up in the church would probably think is an unforgivable sin. The third president of the United States cut and pasted portions of the Bible to make one that he agreed with. I mean, he was this fierce advocate of separation of church and state. The state passed these laws that gave freedom to those who believe differently than the majority. I mean, he cut all ties with state-sponsored religion. I mean, he did some really, really good things. Like many great patriots of the faith and religion, he thought that it shouldn't be forced on anybody. The two needed to remain exclusive from one another. He really believed that. So it became so ingrained in the DNA of our country that it was included in the Constitution, that First Amendment. But much of the legacy that Jefferson left with his belief about the separation of church and state, his Jefferson Bible, which is you can still find it today, is so much of a mystery. Because the Bible, his Bible, the Jefferson Bible, took only Jesus' teachings, his moral beliefs, and these universal truths that you can find anywhere, and he put those cut with scissors and razors, his old Bible, and he delicately cut out all the miracles and the supernatural that was going on in the Bible. And so one of the volumes was lost, but the other one is actually at the Smithsonian. And a copy is still sent to every person that's elected to Congress. But this got me thinking, how often do we do the same thing to our own Bibles? I'm not talking about cutting up scissors. I've never been able to even write in a Bible without feeling guilty, so it's not about that. What I'm talking about is that all of us have our own Bible in our hearts and minds that uplifts certain passages and kind of leaves to the side some others that we don't want to deal with. So let me give you an example. My dad and I, we had a lot of disagreements about God and the Bible, and the majority of those disagreements came from our view of God and how different they were. If we're honest with ourselves, most people's religious disagreements with others, whether conservative, progressive, agnostic, or whatever, they can all be determined by how they view God. My dad grew up with a father that never said that he loved him until he was married and had kids. His view of God was like that of his own dad. He was stoic, unwavering, oftentimes judgmental, and always detached. My upbringing was different because while it was in a more fundamentalist setting, there were snippets of grace all around. I mean, my dad, because of what his dad did, he told me he loved me all the time. I had really loving grandparents, aunts, and uncles. I saw grace and love even if I didn't hear about it at church. I mean, this passage, it shows us how our versions of God are always quite different. I think about it to this day with my dad. What would our conversations have been like if we would have listened to one another instead of waiting to say what we wanted to say? And this is where today's passage comes in. Because this passage is the central teaching and truth in the Jewish faith, like Rebecca said. It's appropriately called the Shema. Now that word Shema is the Hebrew translation of listen. Now we see it in the first line, in the first word of that command. It says, "Hear, O Israel," but it's better translated listen. Now we all know the difference between hearing and listening if you have kids. You definitely know this is true. Because if you've ever told your kids to do something and they did not do it, they're hearing you, probably. They are hearing you. And they can probably recite what you said to them. But if they go out and actually do what you're telling them to, they've listened. Because listen has this ability to be put into action whenever it's being told. Something has to go along with listening. So the Lord says, listen, people, listen to me. This is very important. This will be on the test. This is something you need to put into action. Everything I say after this, you need to listen to. And in essence, this is kind of a repeating of the first commandment in Exodus 20, and it's actually rephrased at the beginning of Deuteronomy 5, where it says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. That first line, oh, hear, O Israel, the Lord is one. The Lord is our God, the Lord is one. The Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Before anything else is understood about this passage, what we are saying, before country, before allegiances, before beliefs, this is the most important thing. The Lord is our God. And this is why I brought up our views about God causing disagreement, our views of God causing disagreements, because we all have them. You know, some think God is one way, while others think God is something entirely different. And sometimes in order to truly grow as a Christian, we have to set aside all that we think we know and begin from scratch. You know, if you've been a Christian the majority of your life, this is going to be hard, because if you think church should be hellfire and brimstone because that's what you think God is, then you're going to be disappointed. But if you think that church is all and God is all sunshine and roses, then that God isn't from the Bible either. But when we start from scratch with the only commandment that both the God of the Old Testament and Jesus in the New used, it's a good place to start. This is a good place to start from scratch. But we're called to listen. We're called to recognize that God may not be who we think God should be. And then we're called to love. Frederick Buechner writes, the final secret, I think, is this, that the words, you shall love the Lord your God, become in the end less a command than a promise. And that promise is that, yes, on the weary feet of faith and the fragile wings of hope, we will come to love God at last, as from the first he loved us. Loved us even in the wilderness, especially in the wilderness, because he has been in the wilderness with us. He has been in the wilderness for us. He has been acquainted to our grief. And loving God will come at last to love each other too. In our picture of God, we have to start here. We must start with love, or this whole Christian life is a waste of time. Other ideologies will come and go. Beliefs will change and adapt to the Holy Spirit's leading. We will have to change eventually as a church to reach people, but what will not change, what will remain, is love. Always. I mean, it's the only self-defining characteristic of God, and one that actually changes things. Because fear and anger and judgment, they're all going to have their day in the sun. Despair, loneliness, selfishness, they're going to win more times than we like. But love is a constant because God is love. And this is often where people struggle with God, because love makes us really vulnerable. It weakens our prejudices. It makes us think that there is something more important that we are missing out on. I mean, love is terrifying, because it leaves it open that we may not be right. It causes us to change, and we don't like change. But God is calling us nonetheless to love and to trust that love is enough. William Young wrote in The Shack, God saying, all I want from you is to trust me with what little you can, and grow in loving people around you with the same love I share with you. It's not your job to change them or to convince them. You are free to love without agenda. Listen. God isn't who we put into our boxes to make sense of. God is love, and you're called to be the same. That's what he's saying in the Shema. More than anything else, you have to remember this, though. You have to remember this, as our passage says. Keep these words that I'm commanding you today in your heart. Recite them to your children and talk about them when you are at home and when you are away, when you lie down, when you rise. Bind them as a sign on your hands and fix them as an emblem on your forehead, and write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. You know, growing up, I was taught not to air my problems or fears or insecurities. You keep it down. And I had a problem with anger in my mouth, not really cussing, but spitting out ugliness towards people. And I was encouraged to have a personal relationship with God and to keep it between myself and God. Sadly, that phrasing, a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, is the least biblical thing that we as Christians have created. Because our faith, our relationship with God, is something that needs to be spoken. It needs to be given life. Because those words have life. And in them we better learn to grow as Christians. Faith was never meant to be this John Wayne endeavor. It was always something that was found in community and with others. It was meant to be refined and reshaped to get a fuller picture of God. You know, far too often we keep God to ourselves and only bring him out on rare occasions like Sunday morning worship or Wednesday night Bible study. But in the Shema we hear something entirely different. God is calling us to not only listen and love, but also to encourage our children and their children and their children to do so. Because it's so important that in some Jewish traditions, they literally do what the Shema is asking of them. The verses are written, and they are kept in these little boxes called phylacteries. And they are tied to a person's arms and hands. And they are worn on the forehead. And they are written on the doorpost. And then they, like Rebecca said, they recite these twice a day, this prayer. You know, more than likely, Jesus, who was a good Jew, did the same thing. And as he was getting peppered with questions from the Pharisees, like, what is the greatest commandment? He would hold up his arms, look at his forehead, show the doorpost of where he was. And he would say, hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. But then he went a little further, didn't he? Because he knew it wasn't just enough to love God. Because true listening is only found in our actions. He says, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love God. Love people. Put it into action. Shape your life around this command. Change who you are to better reflect it. And it may hurt at first to realize that love is the way for our life, not condemning people or excluding people because they are not as pious as we think we are. Listen and love and remember. More than likely, you may have heard of him, Rich Mullins. He wrote this song that became popular back in the 90s called Awesome God. He was a Christian singer-songwriter, and he was known for his honest and authentic lyrics. And he wrote songs other than Awesome God that were really vulnerable and messy and real. And after hitting it big, he discovered that he was still lonely, he was still miserable, and he was still missing something. And he would drink on all the time. He was always trying to run away from his loneliness. But he and a friend were driving to their next concert when his friend put in a tape with a sermon from Brendan Manning. And the sermon explored these themes that we find in the Shema. Manning said on the tape, "In the 33 years since I was first ambushed by Jesus, I am now utterly convinced that on Judgment Day, the Lord Jesus will ask one question and only one question. Did you believe that I loved you? That I desired you? That I waited for you day after day? That I longed to hear the sound of your voice?" Now the real believers, he says, will respond and say, "I believed in your love and I tried to shape my life as a response to it." But many of us who are so faithful in our ministry, our practice, our church, are going to answer, "Well, frankly, no, sir, I didn't believe it." And there's the difference, he says, between real believers and nominal Christians that abound in our churches across the land. He says, because you are only going to be as big as your own concept of God. You know, we make God in our own image, and he winds up being fussy and rude and narrow-minded, judgmental, legalistic, unloving, and unforgiving. He said, I've been in churches all over the country. And he says, and honestly, the God of so many Christians I meet is too small for me. Because he is not the God of the Word. He is not the God who is revealed in and by Jesus Christ, who at this moment comes to your seat, sits down beside you, and says, I have a word for you. I know your life. I know your story. I know every skeleton in your closet. I know every moment of sin and shame, dishonesty and degraded love that darkens your past. Right now, I know your shallow faith, your feeble prayer life, your inconsistent discipleship. And my word for you is this. I dare you to trust that I love you, just as you are, not as you should be. Because none of us are as we should be. Listen. Love. Remember. Our command by God is not to be perfect, to judge, or to exclude. Our command by God is to listen, to love God, to love others, and to remember that God is love, and we should be too. Maybe today you've never accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. If you'd like to join this church through transfer letter or baptism, or maybe something like me to pray with you. Whatever it is, I'll be down front as we sing our closing hymn, Take My Life and Let It Be Consecrated, verses 1, 2, and 4, page 490 in your books. Please stand as we sing. our God, as we go, help us to listen to your word. Help us to love through all that we do. Help us to remember that you are love. For it's in Jesus Christ we pray. Amen.